So we're getting there with the tissues. We did epithelial tissue in detail last week. So you have that recording. And connective tissue. Now, generally, the connective tissue, my definition is cells, like sparse cells, and a matrix. Like blood is a connective tissue, right? Which is kind of weird. It's probably the most weird one when you think about it. Blood has cells, and you're going to find out you have red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And those are the, I guess we can call them sparse cells. So sparse cells plus a matrix, and the matrix of blood is the liquid plasma. So it's a liquid matrix, the only one we're going to see where it's liquid. So this is the definition. Like bone is a connective tissue. And this is very important because we'll learn this later. Like we're probably learning it now, actually. Bone, which you probably already learned. What are the cells, right? Your osteocytes, your osteoblasts. And you might have heard of osteoclasts. Those are the main cells. I mean, you have chondrocytes, which has to do with cartilage. But bone prefix osteo means bone. So those are the cells, right? Sparse cells, if you like, plus the matrix. And the matrix of the bone is what? I guess you could say calcified matrix. It's hard matrix. It's really called hydroxyapatite.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna log out. Can you accept me from another angle? I'm gonna log out, please.
I don't know what you're asking. I'm sorry.
I'm gonna log out and log back in.
Okay, what do I have to do? Anything for you?
Yeah, just accept me when I come back in. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, there's no waiting room. So anyway, so cells and a matrix. Anybody have any questions about this? Now, with connective tissue, most of the time, the matrix is protein. And the most abundant protein in connective tissue is a protein called collagen. So collagen, collagen, collagen. In fact, collagen is the most abundant protein in the body because connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in the body, which makes sense. So the matrix in most connective tissue is collagen, not gonna lie. So blood and bone, I wanted just to tell you because they're kind of specialized. Like there's adipose is connective tissue. Adipose has cells adipocytes, they're actually called. Adipose sites. Spelling's not right, but that's okay. So adipocytes are the cells, and the matrix of adipose is triglyceride. So it's a lipid matrix. And there you go. So that's adipose. And then another specialized connective tissue you're going to see is called cartilage. And that's where hyaline cartilage, you've heard of that in the bone lectures. Elastic cartilage, very important. Fibrocartilage. Okay, so that's kind of breaks everything down for you. So you can see behind me, if my camera is still on, you can see that's the basic areolar connective tissue or connective tissue proper, as they call it. And that's loose connective tissue. So you look, this is just giving you, it's not categorizing, it's just giving you a general idea of the fibers and the cells. Like there's these cells called fibroblasts. And really you just see the nucleus of them. Always look for the nucleus like we did in epithelial tissue. So fibroblasts lay down collagen. So collagen is these thick bars of, I guess we could say protein, yeah. And these other fibers, a lot of times we call these reticular fibers. Like here, they're better shown over here. This is a reticular connective tissue where it has these dark, dense fibers. And sometimes you see elastic fibers, which are usually kind of wavy. So these aren't great pictures here, but when you do the virtual lab today and you look at the different connective tissues, you'll see things like collagen fibers, elastic fibers. And I'm not talking about elastic cartilage, I'm just talking about elastic fibers and reticular fibers and fibroblast nuclei. So these are really good way to look at it in general. So this is a very young connective tissue, where all connective tissue is derived from this embryonic tissue, which is called mesenchyme. So that's an embryonic where connective tissue is derived from. So you might see that in the lab today, and there will be some examples on the APR when you do that. So ground substance really is what I was talking about when we mentioned matrix. So like the ground substance in bone is going to be the calcium and the phosphate. Ground substance in most connective tissue is usually collagen. And these are mesenchymal stem cells that's laying down future connective tissue. So all connective tissue is derived from mesenchyme. Way to go. So right here, this is now we're classifying. So there's two main types of connective tissue proper. There's loose connective tissue and dense. Now the specialized connective tissue I already mentioned. The specialized connective tissues are the bone, the blood, the adipose, and the cartilage. So everything else is considered connective tissue proper. So I always like these tables when you're going into a test or just to study. So areolar, like the picture that's behind me, is really important for anchoring, right? For anchoring things to other tissue, connective tissue, connecting muscle to bone kind of thing. But I'm not talking about tendons and ligaments. I'm just talking about, between different tissues. Adipose, very easy to see. We'll see that. And it stores triglyceride. It provides insulation and protection. And then reticular. Reticular is what I like to call stroma, like a framework, like that kind of separates the cells within the spleen or lymph nodes or liver. So it kind of holds the parts of an organ together in one organ. It's not holding organs together, but it's holding what's inside an organ together, which is cells, specialized cells. So it has a very distinct look. So again, this is a visual. I'm just going through the names now. So those are your loose connective tissue. So adipose, again, falls into a loose, but it is a specialized connective tissue. So it's part of proper, like next week we'll learn the skin, and you have the outer epidermis, which is epithelial tissue, the dermis, which is dense, irregular connective tissue. But the hypodermis is mostly loose connective tissue, like adipose and areolar. So this is good that you know those. Because remember, the skin, which we'll talk about next week, is an organ. It has all four tissue types are represented within the integument, also known as cutaneous or skin. Dense connective tissue, it's the arrangement, right? Dense regular and dense irregular. So dense regular are your tendons, and this is important. I probably will ask this. A tendon is dense regular, and that connects muscle to bone, like the patellar tendon or the quadriceps tendon connects the quadriceps to the patella. Then you have, which is the kneecap, ligaments connect bone to bone, like the anterior cruciate ligament that connects the femur to the tibia. So get these definitions of tendon and ligaments and know they're dense regular. Now, dense irregular, and you have to look at it, we need a visual. The most common area is the dermis of the skin. You'll see that next week and today a bit too. Periosteum, which you're learning in lecture, the covering of the bone is dense regular. Remember, chondro means cartilage. So the covering of cartilage is also dense irregular. So again, I might have said it wrong, but the dermis is dense irregular, where tendons and ligaments are dense regular, and they look different. Elastic connective tissue, not elastic cartilage. This is just elastic connective tissue. So that gives the connective tissue a little more elasticity, obviously. And where you need that mostly is like the aorta, big blood vessel coming out of your heart, or from the first part of the arterial system, the largest artery, because they operate under very high pressure. So they need to expand and comply, which is elasticity. So those elastic connective tissue is inside of the walls of some place like the aorta, but it's not elastic cartilage, of course. There's very few places where you see elastic cartilage. So this is classifying. Again, love the way your book does this. You know, this little flow chart here, talking about loose versus dense. That's all it's saying. So again, you already learned the outcome of this. And it tells you what, you know, as you're looking at them, you could remember what the outcome is. Dense irregular, dense regular, right? And elastic, adipose, areolar, and reticular. So these are the loose ones. Here's an example of loose or areolar, and you can see the parts. You see a lot of stringy fibers throughout them. They're mostly elastic fibers. There are some reticular fibers in there too. If you see a nucleus, it's a fibroblast nucleus, like here, here, here. All that is nuclei of fibroblasts, which fibroblasts basically lay down collagen, produce and secrete collagen, which is the protein in connective tissue. And then the thick ones, like these out here, this is collagen, big, thick collagen, the pinkish staining material. So it's not very dense. Like when you see dense, regular connective tissue, you see that the collagen is very dense, very few cells. Another thing I should mention too, like with all these things, the loose connective tissue is very vascular, a lot of blood supply in this, arteries and veins. But as you get down here into the dense, it's avascular, it's almost no blood supply. Elastic is also avascular too, we'll say that too. Okay, just so you know. But so for mostly though, most connective tissue in our body is vascular, except for those ligaments and tendons. Like if you ever, you know, strained a tendon or ligament, it's very slow healing because it doesn't have very good blood supply. Where if you strain a muscle, it heals rather quickly because the muscles are very vascular. This is adipose. This is adipose, which is a loose connective tissue. To me, they look like little signet rings. Like here's the cytoplasm of the cell, and here's the nucleus. Like the nucleus is the little stone, and this is where you put your finger. But this is lipids. They're a storage area for lipids, like triglycerides, in the cytoplasm. And the collagen fibers just pretty much make up the outer part. Then they have a cell membrane as well. Here's a nucleus, again, the little stone, adipocyte, and that's the nucleus of the one cell. So this is pretty easy to identify, adipose. Just don't forget, it's a loose connective tissue. This is reticular connective tissue. Again, it's loose, classified as loose. Reticular connective tissue, this is the one that kind of separates parts of an organ, like the liver. So again, the stain's a little bit more purplish and the darker reticular fibers. And lymphocyte is a white blood cell that happens to be in there. So it's one of the sparse cells that you see a lot in loose connective tissue for protection. So white blood cells are in there, like lymphocytes or sometimes neutrophils, which you'll learn in A&P too. So lymphocyte is a white blood cell, which have big nuclei. Remember, red blood cells do not have a nuclei, but these are lymphocytes. Actually, this is a neutrophil right here. That's a neutrophil. I just circled, sorry. And that's it, that's reticular. So you have to get the visual and be able to identify it. Now this is dense, regular CT, right? So you can see the thick collagen fibers. It kind of looks like muscle, so we didn't learn muscle yet, but we'll see it. We may have seen it already. And this is very dense and wavy looking and kind of like peripheral nuclei. So don't get this confused with any of the muscles. Muscles are striated unless it's smooth muscle. So you have to get the visual. This is dense, regular connective tissue. Fibroblast nuclei, thick, compacted collagen fibers, different than loose. This is dense, irregular. And this is what a dermis of our skin is like. So it's dense, irregular CT connective tissue. So right here, this is the epidermis. All of this is epidermis up here. And this is the dermis, and this is what it looks like. So again, you'll look at it on histology, and I guess the best way to see here, it's not as compact as this, as the dense regular. And you can see it's more sparse. There's still thick collagen fibers. There's still fibroblast nuclei. Remember, this is all epidermis up here. This is epidermis, all of this. This is the dermis. So this is dense, irregular. So the dermis of the skin is dense, irregular connective tissue. This is elastic connective tissue. So this is what you see in the aorta. And elastic fibers generally have, especially in the aorta, they have like these dark wavy lines. So it's like a sandwich of elastic fibers and collagen fibers. So the dark staining structures on this picture are going to be your elastic fibers, where the lighter pinkish is the collagen fibers, which pretty much across the board. Reticular stains a little bit different than elastic. So sometimes they're confused. You get confused with reticular, believe it or not, although you see it's different, and elastic, it's the different powers too. But again, we're laying down collagen, collagen. And there is the fibroblast nuclei that you see within the collagen fibers that are producing collagen. That's what they do. So now the cartilage, let me just check in with everybody, make sure everybody's cool. Everybody okay? Laverne, you good? You back? So it's a little more complicated, but and it's going to be a visual. So spend the time in the virtual lab in the APR going through the connective tissue proper, which is loose versus dense. And loose, I guess you got to memorize a little bit, areolar, adipose, reticular, and then dense is your dense regular, dense irregular, and reticular. I'm sorry, and elastic, sorry. Is that cool? So take it piece by piece, compartmentalize it. You should, just like you did with the epithelial tissue, and know the functions. Remember, what I do on the exam, especially for epithelial tissue and connective, I'm going to say, identify the tissue. And you say dense regular connective tissue. And then I'll say, where in the body do you find this? And you say tendon or ligament. What's the function of it? In that case, a little open-ended. You could say to connect muscle to bone, right? Or protection, something like that. You understand? So the same thing with epithelial tissue, now with connective tissue. So it's a little confusing, but you have to separate the proper versus the cartilage. And here's the cartilage now, which is still considered connective tissue. It's just a specialized version of connective tissue. And compact bone is also a connective tissue. So hyaline cartilage, this is one of my favorites. And again, I always put this on the exam, so you should know what it looks like. It's kind of like a light purple staining cartilage. Remember, cartilage is usually chondro is the prefix, right? Chondro, not osteo. So chondro means cartilage. So you're going to see chondrocytes, like sites at the end, like as a suffix, is a mature cell. Blast is usually an immature cell or producing cell. It's producing something. So chondrocyte is the resident cell of cartilage. And perichondrium means the covering. Outer, peri is outer. Chondrium is the cover of the cartilage tissue. So you have matrix, which is outside the cell, and the cells. So the cells in this case are chondrocytes. And you should get used to a little word you see a lot in the specialized cartilage or specialized CT. It's called lacunae. Lacunae is means lake. So usually these chondrocytes, they kind of hanging out in this little pool of extracellular fluid, and that's called lacunae. So when you look at hyaline cartilage, you'll see hyaline cartilage cell, which is a chondrocyte in lacunae, and compact bone too. That's osteocytes though, osteocytes. Because osteo is bone, and a cyte is mature cell, and that would be in lacunae as well. So look out for those lacunae. It's not cytoplasm; it's extracellular fluid. So hyaline cartilage, I asked not a lot of questions, but it's important when we do in lecture too. You've heard of it. So hyaline cartilage is those C rings in your trachea. Your nose is hyaline cartilage, the nasal septum. The costal cartilage, which you should know very well, especially when we do bone. Costal cartilage is the cartilage, the tissue that connects the ribs to the sternum. So costal means rib. The larynx, your voice box, has about 9 different hyaline cartilages. You know, there's your thyroid cartilage is hyaline cartilage, your cricoid cartilage is hyaline cartilage, your arytenoid is hyaline cartilage. So the larynx is made up of mostly hyaline cartilage. Good for protection and keeping airways open, like in the trachea. So it's got a lot of collagen, which you'll see. Fibrocartilage, not as abundant, but this is important too. It's a thicker cartilage. And this one you need a visual for. And this is the cartilage, connective tissue, don't forget, that is in a place called the pubic symphysis. It's like that little disc that connects the 2 pelvic bones. Or you might have heard of an intervertebral disc, right? Intervertebral disc, the disc in between your vertebrae bones, the bodies of your vertebrae. Meniscus in your knees or fibrocartilage. So that's definitely about resisting stress, compression, movement. So it's a lot about protection of the bones, really. So it's cartilage, though. It's got chondrocytes in lacunae, but more thick in collagen than hyaline cartilage or elastic cartilage. Now, elastic cartilage is rare, but you only see that in a few places. This is not elastic CT, like in the aorta is not cartilage, but this is the cartilage. So the place you see this is like the epiglottis. Epiglottis covers the opening of the trachea and the larynx. So when you eat your hamburger, the hamburger goes down your esophagus, not into your trachea where you choke. So the epiglottis is an example of elastic cartilage. The pinna around your ears, like that little satellite dish of an ear we have, about 2 ears. The outer part is made of elastic cartilage. You also may have heard of the eustachian tube or auditory tube, which helps equalize pressure between your ear and your throat called pharynx. And then the ear equalizes pressure to the middle ear. So you have a nice, your ears don't get all clogged up with pressure, like when you're going up in an airplane or you're stuck in a revolving door, you feel your ears need to pop. So the auditory tube is elastic cartilage, and that's basically a passageway for air to equalize the pressure. So they can pop. You don't have that pressure building up. Or if you go deep sea diving, it's really important that you equalize the pressure as you go deeper. So the auditory tube is made of elastic cartilage. So it's really only these 3 places: the epiglottis, the ear, and the auditory or eustachian tube, it's called. And then bone you should know a lot about, especially compact bone with the osteon and the central canal and the canaliculi and the osteocytes and lacunae and the osteoclast and osteoblast and periosteum. You should know all that, what that looks like, compact bone. And then there's trabeculated bone too, which does have osteocytes, of course. So this is your specialized or supporting connective tissue. And there it is. And check it out. Here we go. We have different bone versus cartilage. You'll see the word lacunae, of course, because that's where the chondrocytes and the osteocytes live. Because bone is osteo, cartilage is chondro. ECM is extracellular matrix. So it's anything in between the cells. Like remember, the plasma in the blood was the extracellular matrix. And the calcified areas or protein are the extracellular matrix of bone. In cartilage, Collagen is the extracellular matrix, and the fibroblasts and chondrocytes and lacunae are the cells. So don't forget, ECM is extracellular matrix. Remember that. So looking at the compact bone cells, like I said, they have lamellae, the rings, lacunae is the lake of EC extracellular fluid where the chondrocytes reside. The central canal leads to these canaliculi, osteoblasts, which is mature producing cells. Spongy bone's a little different. It has pretty much the same thing, but that's where the marrow is. Spongy bone, trabeculated bone. So compact bone has the osteon, where spongy bone has trabecula, more spiculated with space between it for bone marrow. So fibrocartilage, again, we'll see. I mean, again, this is kind of goofy down here and not really, yes, okay. But for lab, you really have to get the visual, what they look like. So here's my favorite, right? This is hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage. And now if you look close, this chondrocyte like is in lacunae. Let me see a good picture. Like this is a chondrocyte in lacunae. This is a chondrocyte in lacunae. So I guess you could say the white in this is not the best histology, by the way. That's probably better on the APR. This is a chondrocyte in lacunae. So it's a little tub, a little crib that they lay in. The chondrocytes right, in lacunae. Chondroblasts are laying down cartilage. I would never ask you the difference in a histology, chondroblast versus chondrocyte. So the chondrocyte are laying down the collagen again, and they can become chondrocytes. So in lecture, of course, you learned about endochondral ossification of an embryo, right? After like 8 weeks, or before 8 weeks, actually, the bones form from hyaline cartilage. So hyaline cartilage is our model for long bone development. So all our long bones, femur, metacarpal, phalange, they all started out as hyaline cartilage in embryonic tissue. Yeah. Perichondrium, that's connective tissue too, but it's a loose, usually, dense, irregular connective tissue in the adult. Peri means around, chondrium, covering, chondro means cartilage. Chondro is cartilage. Get it down. This is fibrocartilage. So the visuals are tough. So the APR again becomes important because it really lays down everything out for you beautifully. Here's the chondrocytes in lacunae. There's a little lake right here. This is the whole chondrocyte in lacunae. Here's this thick collagen. Now it looks a little wavy. It's not elastic. By no means is this elastic cartilage. So you have to look at it, categorize it, and classify it visually in the APR. So this is fibrocartilage, your menisci, your intervertebral discs, your pubic symphysis. Is fibrocartilage a specialized supporting connective tissue? Rock and roll. Here's a close-up of the chondrocytes in lacunae right here. And this is elastic cartilage. It's a very big close-up. So this is elastic tissue right here, or fibers in the extracellular matrix. Remember, ECM is extracellular matrix. Nice close-up, though, of the chondrocyte in lacunae for you in there. This is compact bone. Nothing looks like this. So this is a haversian or osteon system. So the central canal is where all the vessels are, bringing in oxygenated blood, removing waste, nerve tissue, lymph tissue. And these little ant-looking things are actually osteocytes in the lacunae. They look like ants, don't they? So as the nutrients come in and out of the central canal, they're distributed to the osteocytes via the canaliculi, which are cute little canals that actually send the nutrients and take away the waste, if you will, and carbon dioxide out. Lamella are the rings around these. Usually that's what that means, like a concentric lamellae. So in this case, it goes two ways. Like it's like the trunk of a tree, and then you have lamellae all coming out this way as well. And don't forget the central canal, which is also called Haversian canal. So this is one of a kind, right? And there's nothing that really looks like this. It usually stains like this, like that yellowish or brownish. Okay. This is blood. It is no problem in knowing what this is, right? So what are we looking at here? Look at the red blood cells. That's an erythrocyte. It's a red blood cell. Erythro means red. Leuco means white. So the white blood cells have nuclei, very polymorphic, which means different lymphocytes have different nuclei or different white blood cells, leukocytes, not just lymphocytes. There's 5 main white blood cells, and they all have different nuclei. But look at the red blood cells. They're like discs with that empty center because there's no nucleus. They are anuclear. And the platelets are basically fragmented cells. They don't have a nucleus either. So erythrocytes are anuclear. Now that means it's not there. Anuclear, no nucleus. And platelets are fragmented cells that are also anuclear. So red blood cells, all they do is carry oxygen on hemoglobin. White blood cells are for protection, and they need to undergo mitosis. That's why they have nuclei. Red blood cells don't undergo mitosis because they don't even have DNA in them. Platelets are for clotting. That's what they're thrombocytes, right? So white blood cells, leuco means white blood cells. Thrombocytes are for clotting. So thrombo means to clot or clotting. Thrombo, clot. So the plasma is all the white. That's the liquid matrix or extracellular material or matrix. ECM, extracellular matrix, is the white plasma. It's a liquid plasma. That's why blood is a connective tissue. Okay, let's take a stop there. Everybody have any questions so far? It's pretty much it for connective tissue. So definitely know the special ones first. That's probably the easiest ones, like the blood, the bone, compact bone, and then the loose one like adipose. It's easy. So it gets a little difficult when you're looking at areolar versus reticular versus elastic. I think that's where it gets a little hard. So spend a little extra time on those and you'll do really, 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 really well. Okay. So can we move on? Want me to just finish this and because I don't think there's a lot left. So we'll talk about the APR before we break up into your labs. So let's just keep going. What do you think? Or you want to take a break? It's up to you. Avanel, what say you? You want to keep going or you want to? I can't hear you. Son.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Do you want me to just keep moving or do you want to take a break? It's not a lot left.
Keep going.
We could keep going.
We're recording, right, Gabrielle? This will give you more time. You know, you can play with your doggy. You can play with this handsome little guy. You have more time for that.
Sorry, my sister usually watches him while I'm in class, so he's been bored waiting for me to finish.
Oh, good. We're almost done. We're almost done, little Poochie. Don't worry. Laverne wants to stay here all day. Laverne will stay here all day if she had to. Laverne's my nurse. That's my nurse. Okay, so let's move on to other types of tissue. Now we're out of connective tissue. Everybody agree? Of course you do, because we've been telling you this over and over. So there's 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal, which is voluntary. Cardiac, which I definitely is involuntary. And smooth. So you have to know, I'm more interested in at this point, just what they look like, but it's good to know that skeletal is the only one that's voluntary, that we can control with our little brains, our cerebral cortex. Both skeletal and cardiac are striated, right? In lecture, and you learn about actin and myosin create the striated look. Skeletal muscle is much more linear, you'll see, with peripheral nuclei, which means it's not in the center of the nucleus. Cardiac is usually a single nucleus, and it's more branching and has these. Now, this is the key to cardiac muscle. You have to see what an intercalated disc looks like. That's the hallmark of the anatomy of cardiac muscle. Cardio means heart. So cardiac muscle is the whole heart. It's nowhere else. It's just in the heart. And you'll see in great detail that skeletal muscles everywhere, right? Smooth muscle is also known as visceral. So the first thing is that smooth muscle does not have striations. And they're kind of spindle shaped, you'll see. Like they say cigar shaped, that's pretty good, cigar shaped. Single nucleus, which is a spindle shaped as well, spiral shaped. But smooth muscle, the key here, and this is important for AMP2 especially, AMP2 mostly. Smooth muscle is what's in your blood vessel walls that make it constrict or relax and dilate. Smooth muscle makes up your digestive tubes to keep the food moving in one direction. Okay, so smooth muscle is very important, but it's not striated. And of course, it's involuntary. And it's about your digestive, your urinary system, even your reproductive system utilizes smooth muscle very much, and cardiovascular, but not your heart. Remember, cardio is the heart. So let's take a look. Oh, look at this, another flow chart. I'm too tired to read this right now, so you can worry about this. But it's basically what I just told you. Where do they have multinucleated, I mean? Are the cells branched? Are they more linear? Do they have striations? Do they have no striations? Which doesn't say that here, but I told you that. And where the nucleus located, like in the skeletal muscle, they're on the periphery. Cardiac and smooth, they're basically in the center. And the key, skeletal muscle is multinucleated, many nuclei in one cell. And again, no cells look like this, right? This is skeletal muscle, but a very big close-up. Let me just see if I can break this down for you. So don't forget, this is muscle. So skeletal muscle, just put the M. So here's the cell. This is the cell right here. That's where the striations are. And you can see the striations are dark fibers of myosin and light fibers of actin. And this is the peripheral multinucleated area of the cell. It's on the outside. Peripheral means to the outside. So this is a good example up here. Like you have the cell here and all its units, and then you have the nuclei on the outside. It's very linear skeletal muscle. So don't forget, it's voluntary. The only muscle of the three that's voluntary. And it's striated. And it's multinucleated. And it's pretty linear looking. And the nucleus, nucleated, the nuclei are on the periphery. This is cardiac. It's going to branch a little bit, less nucleated. So there's 1 or 2 nuclei per cell. And this is the cell. It's striated. Of course, it's involuntary. Just write down, make sure you see it's cardiac. Cardiac muscle. Remember, this is just the heart. This is the heart. So it has these little white areas. And this is like, these are, well, let me tell you something. First of all, one of the anatomical hallmark of cardiac muscle are these intercalated discs. So these are these connective tissue structures that have gap junctions between cells. These intercalated discs are between the cells, really. And they allow for ions, especially something like calcium, to get between the cells or into the cells. So it's branching, it's striated, but physiologically, which means functionally, the difference of cardiac muscle to any other muscle is that it's autorhythmic. Which means it could start its own nerve impulse. It could contract on its own because it has these specialized cells, like this white area is conductive cells for nerve tissue, and that's called Purkinje. We will see this later in the semester. So they branch, they have conduction, they're autorhythmic. So if I ripped your heart out of your chest and I put it into an isotonic solution, it would continue to beat as long as you keep those ions flowing and maybe add a few nutrients here and there. It'll keep beating because the cardiac tissue, the muscle tissue, has its own ability to give out what's called action potentials. So they're pacemakers. They could start its own pace of contraction. So again, for us, I think see if you could spot the intercalated discs. Notice that the singular nucleus and the cells are branching, still striated. And of course, it's not voluntary, it's involuntary. Only skeletal muscle is voluntary. So this is smooth muscle, also known as visceral. So it's you got to be careful here because you got to look at this muscle. It kind of looks like dense regular connective tissue. So be really careful and look for the spindle-shaped nuclei. It's not striated, and of course it's involuntary. This is probably a better picture at the lower power because you can see more nuclei. You don't see this in like a dense irregular or dense regular connective tissue. So again, make sure you can tell the difference between those visually, because this is what I'll put on the test. And you say, what type of tissue is this? And you say smooth muscle. Okay, so the last one is your nervous tissue. And there's two different cells involved in nervous tissue. The neuron is the active cell, the functional cell. The other ones, and there's about 6 of these in the total nervous system, called neuroglial or glial cells. And you'll learn this in lecture 2. So glial cells aren't what's conducting. Like neurons are very electric oriented. Right? Glial cells are supportive to those neurons. And there's many more glial cells than there are neurons in the nervous system. And there's trillions of neurons. So you can imagine the extent of this tissue. So here's a typical histology that you'll see. And this is a neuron, like this whole, it looks like a kite, right? With like the axon here is the fiber that kind of goes away from this part. This is the cell body, or soma. Soma means body. So this is the cell body of the neuron. Here's the nucleus of the neuron. And on the cell body, you have these incoming branch-like structures, and they're called dendrites. Like dendrite means a branch. So the dendrites are coming into the cell body, and the axon is going away from the cell body. And that's basically how conduction happens. Like another axon will come here, send the conduction or impulse to the dendrites, then into the cell body, then into the axon to the next neuron or to a muscle, wherever it's going. So if you look down here, you can see cell body, right? And these are dendrites. And all the fibers, that you see in here, generally axons. Now, there's only one nucleus in a neuron, and that's in the cell body. So all this nuclei outside in nerve tissue, they're going to be glial cell nuclei, glial cells. And there's different glial cells. You'll hear of something called an oligodendrocyte or a microglial cell. You don't have to worry about that now. Now you just know that whatever's not a neuron in nerve tissue is a glial cell, and that's not part of the neuron. So all these little dark staining structures are the nuclei of the glial cell, even down here, when you look at this massive tissue. So nothing looks like this, but again, you should be careful because it kind of looks like reticular. Stains differently. And again, we're not in the lab looking at the same slides. You're looking at APR in the MH Connect. So you don't have to spend a lot of time on it because there's not a lot of, it's just one cell. We're not looking at nerve tissue until the end of the semester. So does that make sense?